Hey, Miguel Iturrate back here on the CRP, and we're going to go long again. A special treat here. We have a little bit of a series going now called Talking the MMA Old School, and my special guest here is definitely one of those old school guys, Trevor Prangley. Trevor, I had the pleasure of matchmaking for him, for several of his fights throughout his career, and got to know him personally. So he's helping me out here with a special guest spot on the old CRP. Trevor, how you doing?
Good, buddy, man. Thanks for having me on. How you been?
Good, man. Everything's good. Been trying to work on the podcast here with Cadillac and a bunch of the guys that probably with from the old days and stuff. So I'm sure Chad will say hello and he'll be glad to see you as well. You remember old Chad, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So let's get right into it. I was looking, at your Sherdog record, and you got almost 50 fights on there. And then right off the bat in a little warm-up, you said, there's 16 fights that aren't even on there. So let's go ahead and start there. You're in South Africa. Now, we could probably do a separate podcast on growing up in South Africa. We won't even talk about that. But seriously, and I know you're a smart guy on the other, all fighting stuff aside, it's a social, there's a lot we can talk about that has nothing to do with fighting in South Africa and all the stuff that we've probably seen and have been through. So we'll keep that for a separate podcast. But you came to the States in your early 20s on a wrestling scholarship. And then, that was in the mid-90s. So you take it from there.
Well, it wasn't actually a scholarship. I made a deal with them that I would walk on for my first semester, and if I made the team, they would give me a scholarship the rest of the time. So I took a chance and sold all my shit in South Africa and jumped on a plane. After I paid for my first semester of school, I had $1,800 in my pocket. So it's good motivation to make the team. I ended up making the wrestling team and got the rest of my schooling paid for and all that stuff. So that's basically how I came to you.
And you went from South Africa right to Idaho, because I know you're Idaho resident now, right?
Right to Idaho. I actually met a guy who brought a cultural exchange team to Idaho, and he was from Washington, which is just across the border. And he hooked me up with the coach up here at North Idaho College.
Good. Now, it's funny because if I'm not mistaken, Cape Town is beautiful with mountains and epic and stuff. And you just went, you had to go to Idaho, right? Beautiful there, and it's almost, they got to be equal, right? Different but equal in beauty.
Yeah, they're different but equal. I mean, they're both just beautiful places. I mean, I've traveled around the States a lot. Fighting's taken me all over the place, and it's really hard to beat North Idaho.
Yeah, I was going to say that about you, because actually I remember too, around the time that you had camps for, serious fights, and you've also been part of other people's training camps for serious fights, you would go down to Northern California and spend some time down there, but you would always head back out to Idaho. There was nothing dragging you away from the mountain.
There was no, I mean, I came from a big city and there was just millions of people, and when I came to Idaho and this little town and the beauty and just the tranquility and the quietness of life, where you could go out for the day and leave your house unlocked and not even think twice about it, was just something totally new to me coming from South Africa. I mean, where you got the tires stole off your car while you were driving, So
like I said, you once told me that your father kind of, like a South African, boy to man ritual, around 10 years old, your father gave you a gun and said, son, you got to be armed or something,
Yeah.
Is my memory screwed up? Is that right?
Close. We're close, but we'll leave it at that. We don't want to drag that history into it. So.
No. South Africa's for a different podcast. We already said that. But so you're in Idaho, you're wrestling, and now in 95, 96, right around there, there's also the UFC has already had a couple of shows. If I'm not mistaken, from there may even be the wrestling connection where the Mark Coleman popped up, and then prior to that, Dan Severn, you had wrestlers popping up. Was that your connection? How'd you hook up with the whole fighting thing early on?
No, I just in South Africa we'd watch some of the bootleg videos, and I was bouncing at a nightclub with a group of bouncers, and we just try to train that shit by ourselves, just to try, basically put everything to rest about what's practical and what's not in a street fight, as opposed to, learning a karate or some kind of single style where you're going to get your ass kicked when you try to do it on the street. So that was my first introduction. Then when I came over here, I just wrestled straight. And during the off season, after my first year at college wrestling, there was a jiu-jitsu gym. So I joined that just to stay active, keep myself in shape and so forth for the off season. And, I didn't fight that whole off season because the college had a stipulation, you can't do any fights or anything crazy like that while they're paying for your school. So that's how that happened. But then after my second semester, when I was done, I got talked into having a fight and went ahead and did it. I just, for no particular reason, there was no money back then. You know what I mean? We were fighting for free for my first. It took me 18 fights before I made $1,000, and that was to fight Babalu. So
yeah. It's funny now. So you're talking about 1997, right around there.
Yeah.
Now that's not on Sherdog, so I'm about to ask you about that fight, but I'll give you a little old reminisce too. Old school guy, Dave Monet.
Oh yeah.
Now, Dave, before he came to Hook and Shoot, was kind of known on the scene because he won something called the Wisconsin Valley Tudo. Now, this thing was they fought in an abandoned house that had no heating in it, and Wisconsin can get pretty cold, like Idaho can.
Oh yeah.
And it was like 30 degrees outside, and these guys they fought, and there were guys like John Rankin, Henry Matamoros. They were like, it was not an easy tournament, in a house with no heat. And Dave won it, and went on to be the first UFC middleweight champion. Now, 97, anything could happen in your first MMA story. So shoot, let me know, what was yours like?
Well, I actually lost it by decision, but it was.
Let me ask you a question. I'll start from the very basics. Could I go to Ticketmaster and buy a ticket for this fight?
No.
Okay.
No. I think if there were 75 people in the audience, it was a lot. It was just a little private fight, and it was something we'd never done. It was still that fight was actually open fist, so you could slap somebody and hit him with an open hand, and that was about it. No gloves, no nothing. Just I don't think I even wore a mouthpiece in that thing. We just jumped in the cage and we started scrapping, and it was a 5-minute round, and there was supposed to be an overtime, but it didn't happen. And, just inexperience. I lost by the judge's decision. So,
well, what did you think of the open hand? I mean, that's the old pancrase style, which in the was all over the place. So had you practiced that? Had you seen that, or
a little bit? We'd practice and stuff, but it's like everything else. It's not like, I don't know, man. The sport was not even really. There was no way to train for it back then because nobody had developed anything. So we were just in the gym with no pads or anything on like that. You know what I mean? And it's just it was a different breed of fighter back then, I think. So we jumped in there and slapped each other around, and he got the decision, and we moved on after that. So it was. Yeah. But I got the bug. The bug bit me, and I just wanted to compete.
Yeah. It's funny. Back in the old days when I knew like a lot of the fighters and was active and stuff, I always drew a line where, like, what you said, compete. That is what this is. This is competition. And there are a few guys, that you could take to Brazil for those fights because they were a little more life and death. Not truly life and death, but they were a little more hardcore.
Absolutely.
And I always liked it. I was like, and Trev, you were one of the guys that was on my World War I team because if we had to go knife Krauts, you probably would be somebody to go do that. And I mean that with a lot of respect. That you were a guy that had a lot of, like rough instincts too about survival. I think that comes with the upbringing in a tough place too. But so in the '97 open hands and stuff like that. But you're also a great athlete and stuff like that. So now you start to get good. When did you know that you were going to, dedicate more time to this? And when was the first time you got a taste of something a little bit bigger? Like you said, I think at some point early on you fought Babalu.
Well, actually, my first big fight was my third fight. I fought that little cheesy fight, and then I fought a kid over in Yakima, and it was funny because I was on that show. was the first time I met Crazy Bob Cook, because he actually fought on the same show with me. It was Wenatchee, Washington. We fought over there, and then my third fight ever, I got duped into going up to British Columbia in Canada. And they said, "Oh, we got a green guy for him to fight. Bring him up." So we all went up there. We tracked up 3 or 4 guys, and I was the main event. And I'm like, "Oh, what the hell's going on here?" Well, I fought Dennis Kang in the main event on my third fight ever. So it was I actually won the fight, but I got my ass kicked before I got the win. So it was it was just rough back then. No, there really wasn't any kind of internet that you could check your opponent out or nothing. You just going in blind every time, and you were getting set up by promoters left, right, and center. But it was a fun time. You know what I mean? It was just it was raw, and like I said, we made no money, and I didn't care because I did it because I just wanted to compete and I loved it.
It's funny, guys. No, and you get that same sentiment from some of the old school guys, especially guys like you. With once you get over 50 fights, man, something you had to love it. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's like I'll tell you a funny story. I don't know. Do you remember a heavyweight named Meat Truck, Kerry Shaw from the old days?
Oh yeah.
Okay, the Meat Truck. He gets a call to go to rings in Japan, and they tell him they got this guy, and they send him a picture of this Russian guy that doesn't look like much and stuff. And they're like, he doesn't have a lot of fights. Just come on over and fight him and stuff. And it was Fedor.
No. Yeah, he's probably had a fucking 300 Sambo matches, but
and he said, he goes, I was abused. I mean, he goes, I was bleeding. He mounted me like twice, like all in the first 2 minutes of the fight. He was destroyed. And he's like, they lied to him.
Yeah.
So,
oh yeah.
It's funny. So now Dennis Kang obviously was a guy with a future as well, a UFC guy. An American top team, or a guy who will gravitate to American top team later.
Yep.
And make a good name for himself. I worked with Dennis for a while as well. But from there, how'd you get? Now with you can hang. How'd you meet? Did you stick with Bob Cook? Because Bob is part of AKA now, and that's that's big time.
Well, the way that happened is Josh Punk Thompson. We went to college together up here in Idaho. We wrestled on the same team up here for a year, and then he went down to California, and we stayed in touch. We had a love-hate relationship because he was the Punk back then, really lived up to his name, and it was either we were buddies or I wanted to kick his ass. And he was training down there and kept telling me to come down, and I was like, I wasn't really interested because I was trying to scrape together a living. There was no money in fighting back then, so I was trying to work and do everything we could. And I had a guy promote a fight up here, and I fought on the show, and Josh Thompson actually fought on that show too up here, and brought Bob as his corner guy, and introduced me, and after that they invited me back down to AKA, and that was when I got the call to fight in I think it was the IFL, that tournament, that big tournament where it was myself, Jeremy Horn, Chael Sonnen, Babalu, Shogun, all those guys. It was in Denver. IFC, okay. Yeah, I don't remember it was that far back, but that's the first time I went down and trained for 2 weeks down there. And that's when I really had an eye-opening as to, what the sport was about and what training was about. It was just a totally different level to what I was used to up here as far as training-wise,
What was that Babalu fight? Like, if I remember correctly, Babalu was still pretty young, but when you get a guy, and he was like if I remember correctly, he was not a jiu-jitsu guy. He had a wrestling base for a Brazilian, which was rare, and he had Pedro Rizzo and Marco Ruas, from that camp. So it was like he was like a scary guy, like with guys with reputation and stuff like that. And then, you wound up going to the full rounds with him,
Yep. The decision with him was a really tough fight, and it was a great learning experience. I mean, I got beat up pretty good, but we traded good blows. You know what I mean? I dropped him once. He freaking busted me up, and we had it was, I don't know if you can call it a good fight, but it was a good fight. You know what I mean? I enjoyed it, and I learned a whole heck of a lot. I learned that, hey, this is what the top level guys are like, because he was already an upper comer at that stage. You know, he was relatively unknown, but he was known. He was already tough, and I think he fought in the UFC pretty soon after that. You know, because he won that whole tournament.
Yeah. Now I'm looking back at his record. He did a tournament of fights in September of 1997, and then didn't fight again, according to the record anyway, until January of 1999. I was at that January of 1999 fight in the IVC in Brazil, and he beat up that guy pretty good too. And you knew then he was a prospect. You know, the IVC was definitely a proving grounds where, you know, it was no gloves. It was on that show that a guy actually ended the fight with like running headbutts in the corner. You got the guy trapped and just headbutted him to take him out. So, you know, stuff you never see that anymore. You know what I mean?
No, it's a lost part of the sport, man. You know, it's I would have done that my whole career if we could have. It would have been awesome. You know what I mean? But it's just like everything else, it got watered down a little bit. You know, when we started, there was no rules. I mean, I remember fighting every show you went to at different time limits. The one show I went to was a 1 15-minute round and then a 5-minute overtime. And I actually fought Robert Farless on that show back in '99. Yeah, and that was a Yep. And I mean, we stayed pretty good buddies and stuff after that. It was a good fight, you know, went the distance. Like I said, 1 15-minute round with a 5-minute overtime.
Right. Yeah. Tell me an old school story from those days. One that makes you think, wow, I can't believe, you know, what we went through. Some, you know, a fight with no doctors or a bad knockout or, you know, something weird that happened, even if it wasn't just on the show.
Let me tell you how sick how much we loved it. I mean, we drove to a little town in Montana. I don't even know what the hell we were thinking. I got $20 in gas money, and we thought we were styling. Right? We had to camp. There was no hotel room, so we took a tent. We camped outside. Went to the fights, and it was in a high school gymnasium on a wrestling mat. So we just fought each other on an open mat. There was no ring, no nothing. But that's how it was. Like I said, that's how it was back then. You just showed up and fought somebody. It was the weirdest thing, you know. You just showed up and there's a guy there, and you just fucking fought. And every little organization had its own rules and regulations and time limits, and you know there was no unified rules. There was no nothing. But that's what was so fun about it, I think. You know.
Yeah, there's an adaptability and stuff like that. I remember
you almost felt like you were doing something wrong. It made it a lot funner, you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. It was, you know, there was an edge that was taken away when the commissions came in, basically. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And it's like,
absolutely.
It's like, and I know that there are places there, but you know. If you have a promotion that's run correctly, you're simulating a lot of what the commission brings, even at a higher level. Like even with, you know, with the doctors and relationships like that, I think it's a lot of clerical work they do now. So I'm not a big fan of theirs. But so now, at what point how did talk more about how did the relationship with Crazy Bob develop? Because Crazy Bob, to me, a legend. You know, not only, you know, from the old fighting days and stuff like that. And I always used to kid around with him about that because by the time I met him and got to know him, he was a trainer and like you stated, a corner man and a guy who just managed, you know, the whole fight day management is a big deal. You know what I mean? It's like as an observer, I could see, you know, when a guy takes that jump and it's a professional team and when, you know, the guys are over there, you know, having 7-Up and Skittles as a warm-up drink.
Yeah. You know? I don't know, man. I don't know what to say about Bob. Bob really is one of my favorite guys in the sport. He really is. I never felt comfortable without him in my corner. We were like-minded. He was just like fly by the seat of his pants. I mean, he would corner me in fights and we would bum focused mitts in a bucket from people because we didn't bring our own shit. It was just the way he was back then, you know. If somebody didn't bring his stuff for him, we just bummed it from one of the other fighters. He was, you know, and just a really good fighter himself, really tough guy. I mean, I think in all the years I trained down at AKA and Bob would train with the fighters a lot. I think I subbed him one time in all those years, you know, and he's just a great guy.
To be respected. He's definitely
he really is.
And he's out there still with some of those guys. So let's talk a little bit about those times at AKA and the heyday when you were down there. Let's go. Let me tell you one story, and let me ask you one question. You still watch UFC, right?
Oh yeah, on and off. Not as much as I used to, you know.
Yeah, I mean it's hard to watch every single one nowadays.
Yeah.
Unless, but you know, you still watch it. It's fun. I'll tell you a funny story. You remember old Dave Strawson?
Oh yeah.
Me and him did one of these a few years ago, and the big fight going on right at that time was, you know, a pretty big fight. It was Chael Sonnen had just fought Anderson Silva the first time. And so Chael was at his highest moment, you know, and Dave knows Chael and stuff like that. So I do on the internet, fly by the seat of our pants and get the podcast set up. First question to Dave, so what you think of the fight? And Dave's response is, I don't know, I haven't watched the UFC in 4 years.
Yeah, that's about how it is, man. I like to watch it when my AKA guys are fighting. Other than that, I don't really watch too much.
Who are the AKA guys like that you follow now first, and then we'll get into some of the old school guys and talk a little bit about Kane too.
I follow. Obviously Kane when he fights. If he will fight again, I don't know. But I follow Daniel. I watched all Thompson's fights. Any of the guys really that are from my era, you know what I mean? There's not that many of them left, but Luke, I watch all Luke Rockhold's fights because him and me were big time training partners. John Fitch was also one of my main training partners, so whenever he fights, I try to get a look on it. So just a trip down the memory lane, you know what I mean? Yeah. These were guys, and it was just it was times that it's indescribable times you won't get back, but just so awesome to have done it, you know?
Yeah. You know what's funny? If you think back, you were on a few cards of mine that had Masvidal on them, and, you know.
Oh, yeah.
Here's a kid who's now he's not a kid anymore, right? But he's now an overnight sensation after 16 fucking years, you know?
I know. It's just the way the sport hit. He was always extremely tough and talented. He was always just a savage, but just never got the recognition or just couldn't pull off the big time. But, I mean, he finally got it, you know what I mean? And he deserves it.
Yeah, that Askren win, if I said to some friend of mine on one of these, right before the Askren win, if I could talk to George, I would tell him, look, you know, the past is the past. You've won many fights. You've lost a few. You have to win this one. You know, if you want to put your kid through college, you have to win this one. So, you know, he broke through at the right time after 60 years. So, yeah, I was pretty happy about it. So you feel –
I was too, you know.
Go ahead, you go.
Yeah, he's one of those – he's also just one of those – he's young, but he's the old school guy, just a real guy, just a real fighter who fights because he wants to. You know what I mean? Obviously, he wants to make some money, but that wasn't why he started, you know?
Yeah, no, that's for sure. And it's funny because, you know – yeah, when he was a kid and coming to the shows and stuff like that, but he always had a level of professionalism because, you know, he was always a guy who was a hard trainer. He had a lot of people that, good people, you know, like the Avalon brothers were some serious shit, you know, even before he got to ATT. They were, you know, I wanted to do you against David, you know, at some point. If you remember that fight David had in Costa Rica?
It was freaking awesome.
Where he broke his nose?
Yeah,
Man, I don't know. I don't remember who the next fight was, but I do remember seeing them in the ring and just be like looking at the floor. They weren't looking at the opponents, not listening to anything. They were just looking at the mat and the blood all over the ring and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, and that was the one, you know, and I remember you, big, bad, tough. You got all squeamish when that little Japanese girl broke her foot.
Yeah, that was kind of nasty, though.
Yeah, that was bad. I got to go to Japan like 6 months later, and she had been at a hospital, like rehabbing and stuff. She fought again. And
did she?
You know,
oh, good for her. Good.
Yeah, I was really.
I mean, that was a nasty break, though. That was nasty.
Yeah, that was, to me, that was one of the worst moments. And also that it happened with a girl because, you know.
Yeah.
Once she started kind of screaming, it was just that, you know. I know she's an athlete and that she was, train for that stuff, but it was a little girl screaming, you know. It's just hard to watch, you know.
It
So, what's your favorite of your fights? What's the fight like you showed your kid when he was old enough, or you're gonna show your kid, or
Yeah, you know, I've given it a lot of. I don't really have a favorite, you know what I mean? I think one of my best fights was the Yuki Kondo fight. I think I was at my prime on that one, and you know, it was, believe it
I
or not,
agree.
one of my easier fights, you know. So
Uh,
I think that was I liked that fight because it was the most prepared and the most motivated to win that I ever was on that fight. I mean, I trained my nuts off for that fight, and I was in the best shape I've ever been in my life, and it just gave me a glimpse of maybe, you know,
well,
what could have been, you know.
I appreciate that. You know that you would, you know. I considered it a fight that, you know, with Bodog, it didn't last or anything like that. But if it had lasted, and you look at it, we had a pretty cutting edge roster. You know, people talk about Strikeforce, and I give Strikeforce a lot of credit because they were obviously much more advanced than we were in
Yeah,
certain aspects of the business. But I don't think their roster really matched up with ours. Not when you consider, you know, Alvarez and Masvidal. You know, take a little bit of credit for Kane. We, you know, maybe had a shot at having Kane early.
that's
And we
right.
had,
He did fight on the same card as Buffalo Head. Now I remember. Yeah, that's right.
yeah.
So
And you know, we had Chael, who became a big star,
sure.
and guys like that. So I felt good about that roster. And you know, with you, I know that, you know, I think you're a couple of years younger than me, so you've been retired now for 4 years. But I don't want to say you were at the end. I think, but we caught the end of your prime, like you're
You
saying.
did. Yeah,
And
absolutely.
if we had gotten to continue your next fight, I think we sort of set it up one day, was going to be against Matt Lindley. And, you know, we had Chael sort of, my thought was Chael's a little bit younger. He's waiting in the wings, so to speak. And, you know, at that point, we didn't have the Chael we do now.
Actually, we were talking Matt Lindley, but we were also talking Gegard Masashi for a while there too, because he was just coming on the scene, and we were talking about fighting him next, which would have been a hell of a fight. So,
Yeah,
and
Musashi
that
was
would,
another guy that's on our roster for a little bit.
yeah,
I'm pretty confident. If I'd stayed in the game, I'm pretty confident I had a good shot at retaining people as long as I had the right backing. You know,
yeah,
I think
yeah.
everybody felt pretty good about competing there. Musashi was tough, you know, and he was a guy that
Just tough.
he shows up and he's a little, you know, he had a leather jacket, and you know, he's I don't want to get wrong his ethnicity, but he's not Dutch, you know, but he's from
No,
Holland, but he's not Dutch. He's from, I don't want to say Armenia, but he's something, you know,
somewhere out,
Eastern European or
somewhere
something
out
like
there.
that.
He was one of those.
And they
One of those
stopped him
guys
at
who
the
just,
airport, you know, and he comes in
yeah,
and he's like, "Oh, mileman," and he's like, "Yeah, they thought I was a terrorist," you know,
yeah,
and nothing fazed him. And yeah, he was definitely a cool character. We'll see. You know, so he was a guy who could be up and down in fights too. You know, but yeah, we
yeah.
had some competition for you. Either one of those guys. Now, you know who was another cool guy? I want to tell this story about you too, because that you fought for me was Casey Uscola.
Yeah,
That was the very first show down here in Costa Rica, and
that's
Uscola,
right.
you know, he was a tough guy in the day, and he did a lot of hard work for me, including fighting you guys. You know. He said
Yeah,
to me, I'll tell you two little stories around that fight. First, the doctor, and this is for everybody out there who may be wondering, you know, how tough is Trevor really and stuff. Okay, the doctor before this fight comes up to me with Trevor's CAT scan and goes, "This guy's got the thickest skull I've ever seen." and you know, and then Casey after the fight says, you know, he had a lot of fights and stuff, and you were probably one of the better guys he'd fought. He goes, in the middle of the fight, somewhere in there, he caught you clean with the best shot he's ever caught anybody with, and you did like a Terminator, like your head went there, and then you kind of just looked at him again, and he goes, "I knew I lost the fight right there at that moment," you know. It's like, Don't hit Trevor in the head.
That's what I tell everybody. I said I built a career on my chin. You know what I mean?
True, it's tough. But let me ask you a question now. This, I mean, with all seriousness, I mean it from the heart because, you know, you were also one of the smarter guys, you know, like, you know, from South Africa and you're moving your whole life story. You're a guy with a real, you know, awareness and stuff, and you always notice things and stuff. How do you feel? Like, were you ever knocked out towards the end of your career? Do you feel like now your chin, you know, did you feel it go at some point? Because that's very interesting to us. No, you made it. You made it through. You feel? Were you ever officially concussed?
Nope, I don't think so. You know, what I do is, I mean, I did notice, you know, when I decided to quit is when I had a couple of hard fights, and it took me 2 or 3 weeks before I could think, you know, my thought process could catch up with what I was trying to, you know, you get what I'm saying? I was a little slow on my talking and so on. And I would think the words, but they wouldn't come out of the mouth properly, or I'd be in mid-sentence and the word would kind of disappear on me. And that's when I said to myself, you know what? It ain't worth it. I'm 45 years old. I've done what I need to do. I'm just fighting because I like it now. But I don't want to. I want to be able to fucking talk to my kids. You know what I mean? In 10 years. So that's when I quit.
Yeah, that's another side of, you know, and I hate to, you know, but I'm trying to compliment you too. You got to be smart, you know. That's, you know, that's a story. You got to be self-aware because a lot of guys ignore some of those little signs and things, and we, you know, we're probably heading towards the point where we're going to hear some sad stories. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
I agree.
And with like yourself, like where you would give a little, take a little punishment to give a little. You know, you got to worry about that. So I'm glad you know, you keep taking care of yourself. You know, don't get beat up in the gym now.
No, I don't. I quit sparring about 2 years ago. I just don't spar anymore because, you know, I go in and I work with the guys every now and then. But if I'm in there all the time, it always turns into a fight. You know what I mean? It just does. So I have some fighters in my gym, and you know, we'll start off nice and 2 or 3 days of sparring, and then one gets hit and then it gets it. So I go in every now and then and I work, and I'm like, hey, I'm only going light tonight, you know, because if I get into one of those sparring brawls, I'll have a headache for a couple of days, and I just don't want to be. And whether it's in my mind or it's actually happening, I don't know, but I don't want to take a chance. You know what I mean? I'm done with that shit now, you know.
But you're still associated with the training in the school, right?
Yeah. I still have my own gym and all that, and I train some guys, but I don't let them spar like we used to spar back in the day. You know what I mean? It's just not. It's not. No,
everybody. You know, you remember Keith Wisniewski?
Yep.
Now Keith's in good shape right now as well, and you know he's working. He's with the iron workers, so he's doing union work in Indiana and stuff, and he's in good shape. He's got a nice little property and stuff like that. But he was a kid, you know. That gym, those boys didn't fool around either. You know, they've got a couple of guys still in the UFC, and Eddie Wineland came from there. I don't know if he's there still, but Darren Elkins came from there as well. That are still in the UFC. So a good gym and stuff. But Keith came up to me after a fight and repeated 3 or 4 times, asked me, how did I win that fight? Tell me about the fight. Tell me. And I was like, man, kid, when you did that, you know, at some point you really got to start worrying. And he took care of himself as well, you know. So I worry about that. But anyway, so talk about Cain Velasquez when he was UFC champion. Talk about, like, you were part of some of those training camps and stuff, I imagine. And I want to hear about you know, that next level where, you know, at that point he's, you know, making real money for the fight. There's real TV behind it. There's real production and the whole entourage. And therefore, there's got to be a real training camp, you know. So those have to be among the most professional stuff. Well, what can you tell us a little bit of insight there? What can you tell us about Cain? I'm also going to ask you who your favorite fighter is and who the toughest guy you've run into is.
Yeah, well, Cain really is. I mean, he really, I believe, was, and the best heavyweight champion there ever was. Just his body betrayed him. He had so many injuries, but the guy was just phenomenal. I mean, I saw myself as a top tier fighter in my day, but there was no hanging with him. You know what I mean? It was by the end when I stopped going down to AKA and he was on his in his prime. I mean, I was not even competition for Kane anymore. It was incredible. The guy is just incredible. I really feel that if he had not got those injuries he's had, he would still be the champion. He would be in probably the pound for pound best fighter there is. He was just that good, you know.
Yeah, I feel like we did get sort of robbed with Kane, because
Yeah, we did.
and in his last fight against Ngannou, that was one of those things that was just kind of sad to see. I didn't enjoy. There was no way to spin. Ngannou, yeah, you got to kind of run with him now and stuff like that. But there was no way to spin that wasn't distasteful a little bit.
No, it wasn't.
I hope he doesn't fight again. I mean, if he needs the money and stuff like that, then I hope he's really, as close to 100% as possible before he tries it again. So.
Yeah, it's just one of those things. He's just a phenomenal man, but his body just couldn't hold up with his own will and his ability to perform. The body just wouldn't hold up. So
so let's wrap it up with a couple of fun questions and stuff. So I remember talking to you about you fighting Anderson Silva at some point. Now I never had Anderson, but hey, if you were our belt holder, we could get a belt versus belt match or whatever it was. And Anderson wasn't with the UFC yet. So, like you said, you were definitely a top tier guy. But who impresses a top tier guy? Name a guy who you really said, "Wow, holy Toledo."
What? Someone I fought?
I'm gonna ask, first just a fighter that you saw and said, "Wow." And then I'm going to ask you about the toughest guy that you fought, went head to head.
Yeah, one of the fighters, who came into the gym who was just phenomenal was Luke Rockhold. Just even when he was green, just an amazing athlete, just an athlete. You know what I mean? So that's been hard for me to watch his last few fights. It really has, because I was training. I was in my prime when Luke started coming into AKA, and he was also one of my main training partners. And just, I was really fond of him. We had a good relationship. We trained hard. We really had some great sparring matches and so forth. But the guy was just phenomenal. I think he was very impressive. And then, of course, and I hate to beat the thing, but John Jones, as much as I dislike the guy, I think he is a really impressive fighter. Very impressive. Finds a way to win.
I know, obviously, with all the controversy around, or else, but he hasn't ever even really been challenged much, So it's hard to argue. But let me ask you about Luke Rockhold, because first, I'll be honest with you, there's something about his personality, at least the public persona, that I didn't like.
No. When he had to, and that's one of the things that happened to the sport, which I really find distasteful, is that it used to be that you got merited on your skills, and now that's not enough anymore. You know what I mean? So you have all these skillful guys trying to be the next Conor McGregor, but they just don't have the same pizzazz or the ability to talk like his. So it's just, and Luke was one of those guys. He just wasn't a real good smack talker. You know what I mean? But phenomenal athlete, great fighter, but it's just sad that the sport, the entertainment aspect of the sport, has progressed so far that you have to be that way to be noticed. Your savage skills are not enough anymore.
Yeah, and he would. Let me ask you, because you were a huge 185er, and there were times where the cut. I mean, you had to work to make the cut, especially at the end.
Oh yeah.
And I mean, you never failed me, but you did have to put in the work. How much bigger than you is Rockhold?
Rockhold's bigger than me, man. He's a monster, just a monster.
So what do you think he would have done with John Jones? Let's say he didn't have. Do you watch boxing?
Not much.
Let's say he didn't have Amir Khan's chin. Yeah. I don't know if but unfortunately, Rockhold has that one weakness that's exposed, and people have found it a couple of times. And But let's say we gave him your head.
Yeah.
Like, how would he do with John Jones? How would you break that down?
That anytime you got a guy fighting with John Jones, it's a tough one because Jones is, even if he turns it into a boring fight, he finds a way to win. You know what I mean? He just does, and you got to respect that about the guy. But Rockhold, he has that length, that long, and he is ungodly strong for as wiry as he is. I mean, not wiry because he's a big dude, but he doesn't have that big muscular physique, but he is extremely strong, and I think he's got underrated grappling, and we've all seen his stand up. His stand up is phenomenal. So I think it would have been a really good match. You know what I mean? If you look at John Jones's matches where he fought tall guys, like his first match with Gustafsson and stuff, he had a hard time because he's so used to having that reach advantage. It's just that little comfort zone. He's able to stand out. But if you got a guy who's almost as long as him that's able to really fight, I think that would be his worst matchup,
Yeah, and there was hope when he would move to light heavyweight, that he might be the guy to challenge Jones. And then he spoke up like, jumping ahead of himself and challenging John Jones, and then it went wrong,
Yeah.
So anyway, but that's a good choice because definitely, you can't knock a guy like that, an athlete like that, Hey,
No.
So let me ask you this question here. How about when we talk about your head-to-head competition? Because really fast, I'm just going to name off some of the guys on your resume here, okay? Now, you got multiple fights with Chael Sonnen. We talked about Renato Babalu. You have a couple of fights with Andrei Semenov. Your UFC debut was against a guy named Curtis Stout, who I know pretty well and was no joke, out of Kansas City. Matt Horwich in his day was a troublesome fighter. Travis Lutter was a guy who at one point had Anderson Silva mounted. Jeremy Horn, we talked about Casey Uscola, Yuki Kondo, Nico Vitali, George Santiago, Emmanuel Newton, a future Bellator champion, who I thought when he was with Bellator was actually fun to was really fun to watch and put in the work. So I mean, this is a who's who: Tim Kennedy, Roger Gracie, Hector Lombard. So out of all of them, which guy is the guy you remember? I'd rather not do it again with him.
Yeah, I mean, I had some tough fights. Lombard was probably the hardest hitter and stuff, but I think my two toughest fights, if I have to go down memory lane, would be against Semenov. Those were
Really?
they were wars. They were just wars. And really enjoyable, miserable fights at the time, but afterwards you were just like, wow. And I liked the guy. You know what I mean? We'd fight each other and go out and party afterwards. He was a good, and that they were tough fights. They really were. He was, he didn't look like he was that strong or hit that hard, but he hit about as hard as anybody I've ever fought. So it was good.
The thing about him, and I was the matchmaker for those, so I'm I'm sorry to underpay you for those. But the thing about Semenov too, and I think this is maybe the case with Amanda Nunes. I know it's a weird comparison, but he had that wide back, and kind of long arms and stuff. And when that back, if you look at the old boxers like a Bob Fitzsimmons and stuff like that, he used to make horseshoes, and that's that deceiving strength. You know what I mean?
Deceiving length also. He was long too. Semenov could hit you from a distance where you thought you were safe.
Yeah. So I remember those fights because both of them were for me. I'm pretty sure. So
they were.
Did you fight Semenov in Russia too?
No, I fought him in Canada, and then one time in I think we were at the Trump Plaza actually, where we fought back in the day.
The very first time with Vlad without Bodog.
Yeah,
I remember that. That was your first fight for me.
That was the first fight. Yeah,
that was the Team USA show. That was probably my favorite show. I remember having the office there in the lobby of the Trump Taj. Back when I used to drink a little bit, we would sit around there and at the bar a little bit, full court.
Oh yeah.
There were times where if I had to go out, I would have been like, Trev, let's go, man. I need a bodyguard because this is the guy that you need with you at any point there. And a stand-up guy who definitely would take care of you, man. I always admired you as a man first, and then obviously everything you did in the ring too.
Yeah, thanks,
I got to go to your house, meet briefly your wife and your little guy and stuff like that many years ago. He must be big now, huh?
Yeah. He's 15 now.
Oh, does he have the bug? Is he going to compete? Are we going to see him?
I don't know. He's wrestling and he dabbles in he does jiu-jitsu and he likes kickboxing and stuff. But I don't really want him to fight, man. I don't know how I could watch my kid in there. I'm not sure I could do it. I just remember what I went through and so forth, and I know it's hard, and I just don't know if I want him in there. But if he wants to do it, of course I'll support him, right? But I'm not pushing him that way.
Okay, and I understand. I mean, better you get an education, but what I warn people is if you're going to promote the young Prangley, be careful that you treat the kid okay and that you don't get him messed up because you do not want to piss the dad
off. You're a dad now. You know how protective you can be, right?
Yeah, it's crazy, man. It's like he came home with a scratch today. He's 8 years old. He came home with a scratch there on the back of his head. I'm like, what happened? Some kid he got sent home from school and he can't come back, the opponent, until he cuts his nails. I was like, what kind of savage doesn't cut his nails? He looks like a huge scratch on it. So anyway, it's crazy. But anyway, man, thank you very much for the conversation. I appreciate it. I want to give you a shout out and a hello from Chad and many of the rest of the team. And definitely invite you back for more conversation, maybe some more talk on some other stuff like the training and things like that, like we're talking about. Now, let me ask you one final question. UFC this weekend, we've got Covington against Lawler. Lawler would have to qualify. I don't think we ever worked together, on shows together, but you may have ran into him because he qualifies as an old school guy. How do you see that fight? Are you watching it, or what do you think?
I think Lawler's going to take it. I do. Covington's tough, but Lawler is just he's just bred to fight. He's old school, bred to fight. No bullshit, shit talking, no posing for the camera. He's just a savage. So I got to go with Lawler on it.
What'd you think of his performance on Askren?
Boy, I'm sorry that it ended that way because I think he would have whipped him. I really do. He looked freaking sharp and phenomenal, and he was ready for that fight.
Oh yeah, I agree with you. And Robbie's a guy that he's an old school guy. I believe his first UFC fight was Aaron Riley, who's one of our guys. So so definitely a lot of fun, man. All right, I've taken up enough of your time, my friend, but I appreciate it a great deal. Anything you want to plug your school?
I'm good. I'm good, buddy. I just want to. I'll plug all the old school people. You know what I mean?
Everybody, get your Team AKA shirts out now. Let me ask you a question. When you said Daniel at AK, which Daniel were you talking about?
Cormier.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. He came in. He came in as I was finishing up there. He was there for about a year while I was there. Also, just super impressive athlete, just an impressive and a hell of a nice guy. He is the funnest guy to train with. It's never a dull moment.
He seems like a guy. Before he had a single MMA fight, he strikes me as a guy who's a veteran already. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Sort of like he has that kind of chops coming in. Just from an outsider's point of view. But I'll tell you, and we can close with this, but I'll tell you, when you said Daniel, I was like, Daniel Pewter?
Oh, no. This interview's over.
All right, brother. Let's go ahead and cut it short there. I appreciate it a great deal. And we'll get back together and do it again sometime soon.
Sounds good, buddy. Have a good one.
Big hug. I'll send you a link here when we're done. Signing off.